Weapons in the Civil War greatly affected the Union and Confederacy. There are many people who helped invent the weapons used during the Civil War.
One of these people is John Griffin. He invented the 3-inch rifle gun.
Another key person is Robert Parker Parrott, who invented the Parrott rifled gun.
General Henry J. Hunt tried to eliminate the Parrott gun from the Union's inventory, and he was the chief of artillery for the Army of the Potomac.
General James Wolfe Ripley of the Union ordered the conversion of smoothbore cannons to rifled cannons. He also ordered the manufacture of Parrott guns. James rifled guns were very accurate and used a lot during the Civil War. Charles T. James invented this weapon.
Joseph Whitworth invented the Whitworth gun. This gun was very rare and was manufactured in England.
Robert Gatling invented the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun was considered to be the father of the modern-day machine gun.
Samuel Colt invented one of the most popular sidearms of the time, the Colt revolver.
Christopher Minor Spencer invented the Spencer Carbine, which was the first shoulder weapon.
One of the most influential people was Jim Bowie. He invented the Bowie Knife and fought at the Alamo.
The Bowie Knife was a popular weapon used by both sides in the Civil War. Its blades were as long as a soldier's arm. This made the knife very deadly. The Bowie Knife was made in Sheffield, England.
Hand grenades were another weapon used in the Civil War. Most of the time, the kitchen type was used. These would explode when they landed on the detonation plates. Hand grenades were used by the Union in the siege of Vicksburg, but Confederate soldiers would cast them on blankets and throw them back at the Union soldiers.
Sword bayonets were attached to the ends of rifles, but were expensive and heavy. This made them hard to carry in battles, so they weren't used very much.
The U.S. Army Model 1850 was a saber used by the North and South Cavalry soldiers that was made in 1850. These were very heavy and were made in Confederate factories for the South.
Before the Civil War, artillerymen were given swords to defend themselves and their cannons. These swords were not very effective, so during the Civil War, they were used to cut rope in pieces for the cannons.
Cannons were valuable and expensive weapons. There were 4 types of ammunition: solid shot, shell, case, and canister. A solid shot was used against enemy soldiers. A shell was a hollow shell filled with gunpowder. A case was a hollow shell filled with gunpowder and iron balls inside. A canister was a can filled with iron balls used in close range.
Cannons were made of bronze or steel, loaded at the muzzle, and most were smooth bores, which means the inside of the barrel was smooth. Loading a cannon was a long process that required many steps. First, someone would wipe out the inside of the barrel, then a bag of gunpowder was pushed down in the barrel and a cannonball was placed in the barrel. After, a long wire needle was jammed into the barrel to make a hole in the gunpowder bag. A fuse was placed into the hole in the barrel's base and string was attached to a pin on top of the fuse. Finally, the string was pulled, which caused the pin to spark. The spark hit the gunpowder, which exploded and fired the cannonball.
Cannon caused massive damage in thermal warfare, so commanders often built reinforcing trenches to protect themselves, these soldiers, and their supplies from these weapons. Sometimes they would abandon thermal warfare when necessary.
Both the Union and Confederacy used .44 caliber revolvers. The most popular used were the Colt .44 and the Remington .44. An anonymous report described the Colt in action. From 16 yards, a Colt Army revolver penetrated 7 white pine boards, each 3/4 of an inch thick, separated by 1 inch of dead space.
The Harper's Field rifle was a single-shot, muzzle-loaded 54 caliber rifle. It had a 33-inch barrel and fired mini bullets. The Harper's Field rifle could shoot up to 1,000 yards.
Many soldiers preferred a single-shot rifle that could be loaded through the muzzle. The bullets used were lead cone-shaped slugs that came with gunpowder wrapped with it. To load a rifle, soldiers followed a several-step process. First, they would tear open the bottom of the cartridge with their teeth and pour the gunpowder in the muzzle. Then, they would put the bullet in the muzzle and use a ramrod to push the bullet down to the bottom of the barrel. After that, they would place a metal cap with explosive on a piece of metal and cocked back the hammer. Finally, they pulled the trigger, the hammer hit the cap, and the weapon fired.
The Enfield was a 577 caliber rifle that was in England's Royal Army and imported from Great Britain.
The Spencer Carbine was the first shoulder weapon that could fire more than one shot without being reloaded. It was the most popular weapon for the Union at the time. It could fire 7 consecutive shots in 30 seconds. It demoralized Confederate soldiers and was far superior to the Confederate arsenal. The Spencer Carbine played a large role in the outcome of the Civil War. The .52 caliber Sharps carbine was liked by the Union cavalry soldiers. It had a 22-inch barrel, was a single-shot rifle, and not a muzzle loader.
The Gatling gun was often used on gunboats. It was first designed in 1861, but it was not ready for testing until 1862. It was deemed successful at the time, but the Union did not see potential in the weapon.
Northern factories produced rifles, pistols, and swords for the Union soldiers, while in the South, many soldiers used rifles from Europe or arsenals.
Artillery fought with the infantry because cannons were somewhat limited to firing at visible targets.
Each artilleryman was cross-trained, so if a member was killed or hurt, the same person could do both jobs of loading and firing the cannon.
On April 11, 1861, 48 cannons were fired at Fort Sumter.
90% of deaths during the Civil War were from rifles. A small percentage of deaths were from artillery because it wasn't that effective during the Civil War. But it doesn't mean that artillery didn't help out the Union and Confederacy.
Rifles had replaced old smoothbore muskets because the rifles had greater range and accuracy. Mini bullets replaced pellets because they flew straighter than the pellets.
New methods of reconnaissance were implemented, such as hot air balloons. Union soldiers would float over Confederate Army camps to gather intelligence. Telegrams allowed quick transfer of this info to commanders of the Union in Lincoln.
Confederate soldiers attempted to shoot down the Union spy hot air balloons using cannons, but failed to hit it. Cannons were also used on boats to return fire with the boat firepower.
Cannons greatly affected and changed the course of naval battles. For example, the Confederate had a ship called the CSS Virginia, which had cannons on it. These cannons shot and killed many of the Union crew of the USS Congress and the USS
The
Cumberland.
USS Monitor, which was the first U.S. Navy ironclad warship, set the design pattern for the future ironclad warships for the Union.
Ironclad warships were made up of completely metal and rode low to avoid cannon fire. They could stand up to anything except for torpedoes. At this time, torpedoes were basically underwater mines.
Ironclad ships were built in 1859. They helped block Confederate ports and prevented trade from foreign countries with the Confederate States of America. This meant the Confederate forces would not be able to get supplies from foreign countries. Explosives also changed the Civil War. Union soldiers dug a tunnel underneath Petersburg, filled with gunpowder and fuse. This destroyed the Confederate forces in Petersburg.
One of the major advancements in military technology was the change from smoothbore to rifled muskets. Rifled muskets were accurate up to 300 yards, which was 3 times as much as smoothbore muskets. The creation of rifled artillery rendered forts ineffective and were replaced with earthen forts, or trench warfare. Previously, the inaccuracy of muskets made a march of infantry a realistic idea. When accurate rifles and mini-balls were introduced, it made infantry marches a suicidal idea. Soldiers learned to take shelter in trenches, and that rapid movement was the only way to advance. Specifically, this caused General McClellan to rapidly begin drilling these tactics with the Union Army.
Cannon fire also wreaked havoc on advancing troops that moved in formations. All the new rifles, such as the Spencer Carbine, the Enfield rifle, and the Straps Carbine, and even hand grenades brought the downfall of Napoleon's tactics.
Ironclads and rotating turrets brought even more changes to naval warfare. The creation of rotating turrets allowed ironclads to continue firing while on the move and not having to worry about rotating the whole ship just to fire. Ironclads also provided support to troops on land.